If we can agree that we're in a spiritual war, and if we can acknowledge that 90% of the people fighting this war on the pro-life side are women, then if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity.
Welcome to Lifeline for Leaders, a podcast created to strengthen and connect those serving in pregnancy care clinics and pro-life ministries. I'm Linda Thomas.
And I'm Kirk Thomas. Each week we sit down with leaders, ministry partners, authors, and experts who shape the pro-life landscape, sharing practical insights you can use right away and inspiring stories that remind you you're not walking this journey alone.
Our mission is to help you serve with confidence and resilience. This is your community, your support, your lifeline. Sean Corcoran is an attorney, the CEO of Men for Life, and the father of 5 children, 3 of whom joined his family through adoption. After a successful career practicing family law, Sean stepped away from the legal profession to focus on speaking, writing, and advocating for fathers and families. His passion for this work is deeply personal and rooted in experiences that changed the course of his life. Today, Sean joins us to share his remarkable journey and discuss why fathers matter in building a culture of life. All right, Sean, welcome to Lifeline for Leaders.
Hey, Sean.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me.
It is truly our pleasure. Well, like always, we're going to lead off with prayer. Kirk, if you would lead us off.
Well, thank you, Linda. I sure will. Heavenly Father, thank you for the power to redeem even our deepest wounds. Help us support mothers, fathers, and families with compassion, courage, and hope, and remind us that no life is beyond your grace. We pray these things in your precious name. Amen. All right, Sean. So I was getting ready for our interview. I was reading a little bit about your story, and I couldn't help but be captivated as to everything that's went on in your life. So from, troubles early, and then an addiction, and then recovery, and then redemption, and then a calling to help others. It's just read like a real movie. So I would love for our listeners to hear your story.
So my story as it pertains to how I kind of got involved in the pro-life movement and Men for Life started when I was 19 years old, and I was away at college, and my girlfriend at the time came to my room and said that she was pregnant. And, at that time, I knew exactly what that meant, right? That meant that there was a baby coming. And so I started talking about and working through all of the ways that this is going to change our lives, the things we are going to need to do because there's a baby coming, not necessarily out of excitement, and not necessarily because I knew how we were going to handle it, but I knew there was a baby coming, and I knew that would change our lives. And, and she stopped me and she said, well, I'm not going to have this baby. I'm going to have an abortion. And, this is before the internet was what it is today. This is before social media. This is before shouting your abortion. This is when people still had abortions in secret and in the shadows. And so, while I knew what abortion was, I didn't know anybody that had ever had one. And I didn't know it was something people actually did. And so, I did the best that I could to convince her that it was not the right thing to do, to fight for the life of our child. And, in the end, I lost. It didn't really matter what I said or what I felt. She was set. This is what she was going to do. And so that's what I was left with in the beginning. And then she started struggling in school. I started struggling in school. And she went and met with a counselor, explained the situation. The counselor said that they were going to help her waive her classes so that her grades wouldn't be affected and she'd be able to continue in school. And she came and told me this. So I went the very next day and I talked to the same exact counselor. And I told her the same exact story. And I said, this is the person you spoke to yesterday. This is the situation that happened. This is the resolution you came to, and I'm the other part of that, and I am struggling as well. And the counselor at that time just said, no, this doesn't affect you, because you're a man. And so that's what I was left with, was the mother of my child telling me that there was nothing that I could do. And the counselor, who really was in a position of authority over me as a 19-year-old young man, telling me that this didn't affect me. So this must not affect me. And it did affect me. And I ended up sitting in my dorm room for the rest of the semester, failing out of college, and moved home, failed out of another college 2 more times, began living a life of destructive behavior At no time recognizing what it was that was causing the feelings that I was trying to cover up with alcohol, drugs, partying, women, because I was told that the abortion didn't affect me. So it didn't connect that that could be what it was. And 8 years after the abortion, I was overdosing in a hotel room at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, and waiting for the police to come and arrest me. And by the grace of God, I made it out of that hotel room. I made it into treatment the next day. And in treatment, the counselor, as she's walking me through my life, stopped me and said, "Hey, we should talk about this abortion." And as we talked through it, it became very clear that nothing else happened that precipitated the years of negative behavior. I was on an upward trajectory. The abortion happened and I crashed. But while I was in it, I didn't recognize that because I was very clearly told that this didn't affect me. And there's no men talking about this, right? There was nobody that I could look to say, well, this affected him, so maybe it did affect me. And, the counselor helped me to make that connection, helped me to begin that healing process, to name my child. I have a son named Michael, to write letters asking for forgiveness from my younger self, asking for forgiveness from Michael, letters of forgiveness to my younger self and to the mother of my child. And it had just begin to heal. But again, the thing that she didn't tell me was, you're not the only man that has dealt with this, that has felt this way. And so I still internalized it for quite some time. I left treatment. I went back to college. I went to law school. I married the woman I'd been pursuing for 7 years. And we started a family. I started a law firm. And we had 2 children. We adopted 3 more. And then during that period, it was about another 8 years after treatment that I was on a retreat, and all these men were sharing these stories of just the hardest things that they'd ever gone through, whether it was, by their design or things that had happened to them. And what I noticed in that retreat was that regardless of what they said, they weren't being met with judgment. They were being met with grace. And so I just really felt pulled that I could share my own story and again, not be met with judgment, but be met with grace. And so I just unloaded everything, all of the negative behaviors, the abortion. I just let everything out. And I was met with grace, and it was very cathartic and healing. But really what was the most powerful about that experience was that after I shared, I had 3 different men come up to me privately and say, "I've never told anybody this, but 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I lost a child to abortion." And whether they fought against it like I did, or whether they pushed for it or there was coercion involved, they had this overwhelming sense of grief, of shame, of guilt, of regret. And I think that really stems from the recognition that we as men are designed to protect. We were created by God to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to leave a legacy that honors God. And the recognition that we failed to protect our own child is incredibly hard. And I'll get comments sometimes on social media, especially, how could you feel such an overwhelming sense of loss of a child that you never met, right? And they're not worded as nicely as that. But that's not the issue, right? The issue is I was completely emasculated at that moment because I knew that my role as a man was to protect my child. And I was told that I couldn't do that. And that is where the overwhelming sense of grief and regret and shame and guilt comes from. And so when I realized that by me sharing, it opened the door for other men to begin healing, I saw that as a call from God to share anytime that I was asked. And so I started sharing, here and there at small pro-life functions. And then in 2021, I looked at my family and realized that as hard as I worked in my career, it was taking me away from being a present husband and a present father. And those were the only things I ever wanted out of life. And so I saw that as, God saying, "Hey, this isn't where I want you right now." And so I didn't really know what I was going to do next, but I knew that wasn't it. And so I stopped taking clients in 21. I stopped practice. I shut down my office in 22. I would say about a week after I shut down my office, I think I posted that on Facebook. Men for Life started asking me if I would come and run the organization. That was not on my radar. I think the popular way to say it now is that was not on my bingo card. So I said no, like emphatically no. There is no way you are going to get me to go run a nonprofit, because I don't know how to do that, and I have an idea how much you want to pay me, and I've got 5 little kids, so that's not where God is calling me. And I fought it for 2 years before God very clearly showed me that is exactly where He was calling me. And so in August of 2024, I took over as CEO of Men for Life. Men for Life's been around since 2018, and I took over as CEO of Men for Life in August of 2024.
Why is it that men are being ignored?
Well, I think it's by design. I think it's by design of the enemy. I think that an attack on the family is an attack on God, right? And how do we attack the family? We separate the union between God and man and woman, and it goes all the way back to the garden. That was the very first thing when we encounter Satan in the garden. The very first thing he does is separate the union between God and man and woman. And so, if we just go back to Roe versus Wade, we've had for 53 years very strong messaging from the opposition that this is a women's issue. Men need to sit down. Men need to shut up. We don't have anything to say about this. This is about bodily autonomy, women's health, all the things that it's not about. And at the same time, the pro-life movement was so hyper-focused on babies and on mothers, as it should have been, that we've got one side saying, sit down and shut up, the other side not saying anything. And so men just sat down and shut up. And look, that's a failure of masculinity, to see evil that is affecting society and to accept silence and passivity in the face of that evil. So I'm not blaming, it was never up to the women who were running the pro-life movement for 53 years to call men to action. It was up to the men to see that evil and to stand up and fight. But that is what happened, and we even see it today in the pro-life movement or on the pro-life side. There's a Gallup poll from June of last year that showed that 54% of men in America identify as pro-life. But where are they, right? They're not actively pro-life, and I think that what's happened is that men, by and large, who identify as pro-life, who can easily say, I don't believe that it's right to kill an innocent baby, and can easily say, this isn't a women's issue. This is about saving babies and not killing innocent babies, have allowed it to become a women's fight. And so that is really where I feel like God is leading me and leading Men for Life, is to get those men up, off the sidelines, because this isn't a women's fight. This is a societal fight. This is a human fight. This is a spiritual war. And so it is more than necessary for men to stand up and to do something. But to your question, I think that it's just the messaging was very effective. The messaging against men was very effective. And you can see it today in anger and hate and vitriol towards men who speak for life. And honestly, I think a lot of men have kind of decided, hey, I'll just write the checks to support the pro-life movement, but I don't really want to be standing somewhere and have people tell me that I just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to have birth, right? And because that's a hard conversation to have. And again, taking the easy route is not masculinity. Like taking the easy route, like being a human is hard. I don't want to separate men and women right now, but being a man is hard. Like you have to do hard things. You have to do what's right because it's right when it's right, regardless of the strongest opposition. And I think, we have lost because of the fatherlessness epidemic. We have lost the drive in so many men in the understanding, the mentorship that is required for young men to know that men have just lost that sense of drive and that sense of, I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Maybe to switch gears a little bit, Sean, just to talk about, there's a lot of pregnancy care center leaders that are listening to this podcast. And when I work with a new prospect, a pregnancy care center, we talk about their services and their programs that they offer, and we get down to you offer a fatherhood program, and some of them will say, most of them will say yes, but we're having a hard time getting it off the ground. What would you suggest to them on how they can improve that program and bring more people into it and make it a success, just as much as the other parts of their services they offer?
Yeah, I think it's two different levels. I think the first level is how do we design a program that is appealing to the young men, right? That competes against the world for their attention. And then the second is how do we get the men in our community to facilitate this program and to mentor these young men? And so to the first question, I think that look, and there's great people doing great work in this, but if we go historically, I think that fatherhood programs were designed for pregnancy centers by the women, who were running the pregnancy centers, and running the other pro-life organizations that were serving the pregnancy centers. And they were created almost as parenting classes, right? And look, all that's important. Learning how to change a diaper is important. Learning how to bottle feed and swaddle is important. None of it's hard. I learned how to change a diaper on a moving baby in a hospital, while he was peeing on me. And so you have to change it again. And I was capable of doing that. But that's what we need to hit, is that capability, the confidence issue, how to be a man. And I think that if what you're selling, and I use the word sell often because I think that everything that we're doing is selling in the sense that we're trying to sell this to gain the attention of the client over whatever it is that he has on his mind right now. If what you're selling is how to change a diaper on a doll for a baby that's going to be here in 26 weeks with a woman you're not in a relationship with, to a 19-year-old man, you're not going to get his attention. Like that is not going to compete with video games and I don't know, whatever else he might be doing. So I would say that where we can look at what's going on in this country, especially, and really see the data outside of just me saying this, is young men are hungry for something more, right? They are hungry for a greater purpose. That is also a product of the fatherlessness epidemic, and whether that means dad wasn't present or dad was just like not mentally present, right? Wasn't intentional. And so they just don't know how to be a man. They don't know what their purpose is. And they hear people like Andrew Tate and Dan Bilgerian, and these guys that came out on the forefront of the masculinity conversation, but in a way that was, in many cases, anti-woman, in many cases, very self-serving masculinity and hedonistic, right? And all about what can I do for myself to make myself appear a certain way and acquire certain things so that people who like that appearance and those things will then like me, which is all fake, right? But the way that they did it spoke to that desire of these young men for something greater. And so they became super popular, and they built these huge followings. And what we can take from that is that the hunger was there and the drive to find it was there. And so if we can fill that need with authentic masculinity, if we can fill that need with helping them to find a greater purpose than themselves and giving them the confidence in life to be a man, and sometimes it just takes mentorship, and look, the qualification to be a mentor for a young man who's never had that is not like super high. You don't have to go to classes. Like, you take your own wins and losses in life and share them and how you have prevailed. Share what it is that you're doing to serve, the greater good or serve your family. And that's where it all starts. And so I think that is where pregnancy centers who have struggled to get client engagement, like to get the client engaged, are missing the boat. And I don't put it on them because they were taking the resources that existed. And women, from the conversations that I've had with hundreds of pregnancy centers at this time, the women who are running these pregnancy centers are very, very well aware that they are not best positioned to teach young men how to be men. And so that kind of goes to the second point, which is, we need men from the community to mentor these young men. And look, it's not as hard as I think people are making it. And I know this now because I have yet to speak at a pregnancy center banquet where they did not then have a dozen men volunteer to help them with a fatherhood program, whether they had one or not. I had one pregnancy center that I didn't even know I was speaking. I wasn't invited to speak. I was invited to come to attend. And then she said, hey, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to get up there and talk about Men for Life. So 3 minutes. Like I said two things. 16 men went to her and volunteered for a fatherhood program that didn't exist yet. Like, good men want to do stuff. Like, they want to help. Men have been going to pregnancy center banquets for decades and not being called to action, right? They've just been showing up and writing the checks, and look, and one of the things that I say all the time is, if we can agree that we're in a spiritual war, and if we can acknowledge that 90% of the people fighting this war on the pro-life side are women, then if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity. And I think that is a big calling. And I think that men, that's not like, men don't want to just write checks. They've just only been asked to write checks. And so I think that calling them to action, but calling them to action based upon a deeper sense of purpose in themselves, to relay that deeper sense of purpose to the next generation, really gets to the heart of something that calls to men. I think all men want to help build other men. That's why, dads coach, right? Like, we want to help teach the next generation how to be. And so it may be just a function of having the right message, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that now is the time. Like even if 5 years ago, before I was involved in this, maybe it wasn't, I don't know, maybe it wasn't the right time to call men to action in this, but now for sure is. I think that there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that I can give to support that. I think that you just have to ask, but I think you have to have something, and I'll be honest, that is something that I found. I had no idea how effective the messaging was going to be when I started doing this. And after several banquets, and like I said, dozens of men coming up and saying, what can I do? I recognized that I was doing a really good job of calling men to action without giving them something, and you lose that momentum. And so I think that there should be a framework, at least, of a fatherhood program. I'm working really hard, and I'll be honest, it's way harder than I expected it to be, to create a fatherhood program for pregnancy centers. And when I say it's hard, it's just, I've got 5 kids, I've got a wife, and I've got, as of now, I'm speaking to 12,000 people this year at different events. So the travel and all that has just made it time consuming as far as putting this together, but it is coming, and it is based upon the foundations of biblical masculinity. So there are things that currently exist. I know you guys have interviewed Andrew. I think that even a fatherhood program based, in the beginning, just on his book, Hero Goes to Villain, is an amazing start. If you were to take that book, and it's an easy book, and it's got questions already built in at the end. The chapters are short but direct and effective. And so even if you took those, I think there's 9 chapters, and said, hey, we're going to do a 9-week fatherhood program based upon this, that's an easy way to pull someone in and say, hey, come help us with this. And I think the other thing is, we know from the Vitae Foundation that 97% of men who see an ultrasound and complete a fatherhood program choose life. And to my knowledge, that's higher than any number of women. And so I think that fatherhood program is immensely important, and it doesn't have to be overwhelming, but if the issue is, hey, I've got a couple of men who want to help, but they don't know what to do. I think Andrew's book is a great place to start.
So here's another promotion. I just want to make sure that the listeners who want to get his book available on Amazon, it's
Yeah.
a Hero Ghost Villain by Andrew
Yes.
Woods.
I was actually talking to Jenny at ABBA Center in Maine, and she was raving about how that you presented at their annual banquet and how well it went and how well you received.
I get really excited when I found out that we've raised, 150% of last year. Like that is a goal that I have for every event. And I don't know, that might be an ego thing that I need to deal with, but it's just fun. I like that because it's not me. Like, I started this in August of 24 and did nothing. I had no opportunity for the first year and a half, and God, and I'm not special. Like God is just working, there's no way I should be speaking to 12,000 people this year. And, because it's not my message, right? It's God's message at the time that he is ready for people to receive it. And so it's exciting to see how well it is received and how excited the men are, man. Like men just for so long have, from what they tell me, it's usually just, hey, thank you for speaking to the men. I've been coming, since I married my wife, and nobody's ever spoken to the men. And it's because they want more. And when I say they want more, I mean they want to do more, but they just have to be asked.
All right, Sean. So if you could offer one lifeline to our listeners, some practical takeaway that they might be able to put to practice this week, something simple. What do you think it might be?
I think it would be Joshua 1:9. I think it would be, be strong and courageous, have no fear, because I am with you. I think that a lot of times in the pro-life movement and arguments, especially, or the debate, we are met with such strong opposition, and to the point of, I saw something that Lydia Taylor Davis put out yesterday, where she was speaking on a campus, and they literally surrounded her, yelling at her and throwing water at her. And it's easy to say, man, I don't want to put up with that. And most of us will never have to deal with that. But just, in our workplace, in a normal conversation, to not hide our belief, and I think that's the most simple place that most of us are going to encounter that is when we hear someone expressing their belief for why abortion is acceptable or okay, or even a great thing. To avoid it is not courageous. To avoid it comes from fear. And I think that we should be bold, and we should be strong, and we should be courageous and speak the truth, and that's the thing. Because we're grounded in the truth with God at our backs, it doesn't matter what the opposition says. And so that would be the one thing that I would call on the listeners to do as we move forward, through this week is, if you have an opportunity to share why you're pro-life, don't be scared. Share it, because that is leading everyone that hears you, even if they don't agree with you. And, and especially the next generation, especially our kids, if we are silent in the face of evil, in the face of opposition, they see that silence, and that is what they are going to do next. But if we are bold, and if we are willing to speak truth, then they see that, and they will be willing to do the same. And so that's what I would call people to do.
Sean, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah.
Your story reminds us that fathers matter, that healing is possible, and that God can bring purpose from even the deepest loss. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. Until the next time, keep leading with courage and compassion. Thanks for joining us today on Lifeline for Leaders. If today's episode was meaningful, feel free to share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation.
Remember, you don't have to walk this mission alone. We're honored to walk alongside you.
See you next time.